A man who had won every negotiation he'd ever entered shouldn't be undone by a wedding invitation. But there Fletcher Baird stood, in the glass-walled corner office of his Yonge Street tower, holding a cream-colored envelope like it was evidence of something he hadn't seen coming. The names on the card read, "Cressida Vane and Theodore Marsh request the pleasure of your company." Theodore Marsh, his business rival, his ex-fiancée, one wedding. Fletcher set the card face down on his desk and poured himself 2 fingers of scotch at 10 in the morning, which told anyone watching that he was far less composed than he appeared. He had ended things with Cressida 14 months ago. At least, that was the version he told. The truth was messier and involved a conversation in a hotel lobby in which she had looked at him with the particular clarity that follows years of patience, and said quietly that she couldn't keep waiting for him to arrive emotionally to a relationship he had only ever shown up to physically. He hadn't argued. That was perhaps what stung most. She had been right, and he had let her go, and now she was marrying someone else in 31 days. He was not going to give anyone the satisfaction of watching him stay home. He needed someone to go with, not someone from his usual orbit, the women who knew him too well and angled too obviously, someone discreet, someone unexpected. He heard the soft scrape of a mop handle in the corridor and opened his office door. Wren Daley was working late again. He'd noticed her before in the way you notice wallpaper, registered without registering. She cleaned the 14th floor on weeknight evenings, always after the staff had cleared out, always wearing the gray coverall with the building maintenance logo on the shoulder. She was younger than he'd assumed when he actually looked. Late 20s, maybe. Dark hair pulled back, a small smear of cleaning solution on her forearm. She moved with the efficiency of someone who had somewhere better to be but wasn't going to waste the time getting there. She looked up when she heard the door. "Mr. Baird, sorry, I'll do the hallway last if you're still working." "I need to ask you something," he said. "It's not about the hallway." Her expression didn't shift much, but her grip tightened slightly on the mop handle. "All right." He told her about the wedding. What he needed, someone to accompany him, to present a certain picture, to engage in polite conversation and not embarrass him. He offered her $3,000 for one Saturday afternoon and evening. Her face went through several calculations he could almost read. Discomfort first, then something practical taking over, then a kind of assessment of him that made him unexpectedly self-conscious. "I clean your floors," she said. "I'm not an actress. I'm not asking you to act. I'm asking you to stand in a room and be yourself. Yourself in a gown that costs more than my rent. That's my problem to solve." She was quiet for a moment. Fletcher had learned to read silences. This one wasn't refusal, it was arithmetic. Bills she was calculating, something she was saving toward. "Why me?" she asked. He considered a polished answer. Instead, he said, "Because everyone who knows me would understand exactly why I brought them, and I don't want anyone to understand anything." She searched his face for something she seemed to find, or find sufficient. "One night," she said, "and I choose my own shoes." He almost smiled. Fine. What followed was 3 days Fletcher had not anticipated. He'd arranged a stylist, a fitting at a boutique on Bloor Street, and a brief session with someone who coached posture and small talk for corporate events. Wren arrived at each appointment on time, navigated every awkward instruction with a dry patience that was quietly impressive, and pushed back exactly twice. Once when the stylist tried to soften her accent, and once when Fletcher told her not to volunteer anything personal. "What if someone asks what I do?" she said. "Tell them you're in design." "That's not entirely false," she said, more to herself than to him. He filed that away. The gown they settled on was a deep forest green. Wren stood in front of the boutique mirror and went still for a moment. Not preening, just taking inventory of something she didn't usually see. Fletcher watched from across the room and felt very briefly something he chose not to examine. The wedding was held at a vineyard estate east of Toronto, which Cressida had chosen because she had always loved the idea of being married somewhere that looked nothing like a city. The drive out was mostly quiet. Wren sat beside him in the back of the town car with her hands folded and looked out the window at the October trees going orange and red, and at some point she said, "She must have loved you once, to be this careful about who sees you today." Fletcher didn't answer, but the observation settled into him like something true. When they arrived, heads turned. He was used to that. What surprised him was the specific quality of the attention. People weren't looking at him. They were looking at Wren. She had the kind of presence that doesn't announce itself, the kind that makes a room quietly recalibrate without knowing why. Cressida found them during cocktail hour. She was radiant in the way that looks effortless and clearly costs significant effort, and she wore a smile that didn't reach her eyes when she took in Wren. "Fletcher, I'm so glad you came," she turned. "And you are?" Wren said, extending her hand without hesitation. "Congratulations on your wedding. Theodore seems like a man who shows up." The pause that followed lasted about 1 second longer than comfortable. Cressida's smile flickered. She recovered quickly, but Wren had already turned her attention toward the champagne table, unhurried and entirely unbothered. Fletcher caught up with her a moment later. "That was precise," he said quietly. "She needed to hear it," Wren said simply, "and so did you." They moved through the evening. Fletcher worked the room with the ease of long practice, and Wren matched him, not by performing, but by being genuinely curious about the people around her. She asked the father of the groom about his woodworking. She talked to the florist about color theory. She made a retired architect laugh twice in 3 minutes. Fletcher watched her and felt something shifting in his chest that he told himself was the Pinot Noir. During the first dance, he led her onto the floor without asking. She raised an eyebrow. "You could have said please," she said. "I'll work on it," he replied. She was a better dancer than he'd expected. Halfway through the song, Cressida and Theodore swept past them, and Cressida's eyes met Fletcher's over her new husband's shoulder. Whatever she saw, in his expression or in the way Wren held herself, made her look away first. On the drive back to Toronto, Wren fell asleep against the window with the easy unconsciousness of someone who doesn't sleep enough. Fletcher didn't wake her until they reached her street in East York, where the houses were small and the porch lights were on. "You were good tonight," he said as she gathered her things. "You were tolerable," she replied. Then, at the car door, "She still loves you, by the way. That's why she invited you." He thought about that for a long time after the car pulled away. Before you keep reading, if you've made it this far, type Maple in the comments. Only the ones who really stayed will know what it means. 3 days later, his investor Lionel Hatch cornered Fletcher at a lunch meeting with the particular air of a man delivering news he was enjoying more than he should. "Your companion from the wedding," Lionel said. Someone mentioned she seemed very interested in the Marsh family's development portfolio, spent quite a bit of time with their people. Fletcher felt the comment land badly. He knew, on the level of clear reasoning, that Wren had done nothing of the sort. He'd watched her the entire evening. But Cressida had been working the same room, and by the time Lionel finished talking, Fletcher's insecurity had already done what it always did, made something false feel possible. He called Wren into his office the next morning. She arrived still in her coverall, mop left in the corridor, expression neutral. He spoke from behind the desk, which he recognized later as cowardice. He told her it wasn't working out, that the arrangement had created complications, that he was terminating the building contract. Wren stood very still through all of it. When he finished, she said, "You're ending this because someone told you I was working an angle, and you believed them without once asking me. It's more complicated than that. It is exactly that simple." She picked up her bag from the chair beside her. "I didn't say a word to anyone at that wedding that you wouldn't have been comfortable hearing. But you needed someone to blame, and I was convenient." She paused at the door. "You're not nearly as smart as you think you are, Fletcher." She left without raising her voice. Wren Daley did not fall apart. She went home to the apartment she shared with her younger brother Sion, sat at her kitchen table, and let herself feel the anger for exactly one evening. Then she opened her laptop and started building the portfolio she had been putting off for 2 years. She had a talent for design she'd been carrying around like something she wasn't sure she was allowed to have. She had a certificate from night school, a folder of personal projects, and a clarity of visual instinct that her instructor had told her twice was the kind of thing you couldn't teach. She'd believed it, just not quite enough to act on it. Now she acted. Within 6 weeks, she had 3 clients, a cafe in Leslieville that needed a new identity, a musician who needed album artwork, a nonprofit whose donor materials still looked like they'd been made in 2004. The work spread the way good work does, through people telling other people. By December, she had more requests than she could take on alone. Fletcher found out the way people who aren't looking still somehow find things out. A mutual contact forwarded him a feature from a Toronto design blog. The headline read, 5 emerging creative voices to watch. Wren's face was the third photograph. Her work was exactly what he might have expected had he paid any attention. Spare, precise, quietly confident. The kind of design that didn't shout. He read the article twice, closed the window, and told himself it didn't mean anything. Then he forwarded it to his marketing director and wrote, "Look into this studio for the spring campaign. Type snowfall in the comments if you're still here. This one's for the ones paying attention." The call came through official channels. Wren's studio was invited to pitch for the Baird Properties spring campaign. She stared at the email for a long time. She thought about declining. She thought about what it would mean to decline. She submitted the pitch. Her work won. The first meeting at the tower was professionally clean. Wren arrived in her own clothes, which were not expensive but were well chosen, and shook Fletcher's hand across the boardroom table with the specific neutrality of someone who had decided to be excellent regardless of the circumstances. "I want something to be clear," she said before the meeting started. "I'm here because the work is right for the project, not because of anything else." "Understood," Fletcher said. He was different in those meetings. Or she saw something different now, that she was watching from across a table instead of a corridor. He listened more than he spoke. He deferred to her on creative decisions without making it look like deference. Once, when a junior colleague questioned her direction in a tone suggesting he hadn't caught up to the fact that she was running the project, Fletcher said quietly, "Wren's the lead on this. Let her finish." She filed that away and told herself it was professional courtesy. Over the weeks of the campaign, they worked late more than once. He brought coffee without being asked. He mentioned once, midway through reviewing proofs, that his father had built the company on the principle that image was everything, and substance was optional, and that he had spent 20 years not being sure that was wrong. "Is it wrong?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "I just took a long time to find out." She looked at him across the table and thought, he means it. She had become quite good at knowing when people meant things. Cressida appeared at the campaign launch, because Cressida appeared at every event that might involve Fletcher. She found Wren near the bar and said, in the tone of someone practicing generosity, "You've done well for yourself." "I've done the work," Wren said. Fletcher has a way of elevating the people around him. Wren set down her glass and looked at her directly. "Cressida, you're a married woman at an event for your ex's company, talking to his colleague about his influence. I think you might want to spend more time examining that than examining me." Cressida left shortly after. Fletcher found Wren outside on the terrace, looking at the city spread below King Street in the February dark. "She corner you?" he asked. She tried. Wren pulled her coat closed. "I'm fine." "I know you are." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I handled things badly after the wedding. I acted before I thought, and I blamed you for something you didn't do, and I'm sorry." He didn't look away when he said it. "That's all. You don't have to respond." Wren looked at the skyline. The CN Tower glowed steady against the dark, indifferent to everything happening beneath it. "You didn't ask me," she said. "That's what I kept coming back to. You didn't ask. You just decided." "I know. I would have told you everything. I had nothing to hide." "I know that now." She turned to look at him. "Why now?" He was quiet, in the way of someone deciding whether to say the thing they actually mean. "Because I watched you build something real in 2 months that took me 10 years to feel about anything I built. And the difference isn't talent. It's that you care about the work itself, not what it signals." Wren said nothing for a while. Below them, Toronto moved through its ordinary Tuesday evening. "I'm not ready to trust you completely," she said, "but I'm almost there." He nodded. "That's more than I deserve right now. Type Aurora in the comments if you've come all the way here. You know who you are." It was a Saturday morning in April when she went to find him. Not because anything particular had happened, but because enough time had passed, and she was tired of waiting for herself to feel completely certain, which she suspected she might wait for indefinitely. Fletcher was in his office, working through something on his laptop, with the focus of a man who has not yet figured out what to do with his weekends. She sat down across from him and he looked up. "You told me once that I was different from everyone who would be in that room," she said, like it was almost an insult. "It wasn't meant to be." "I know. But I want you to understand what I actually am." She kept her voice even. "I'm a woman who cleaned your floors at night and studied design in a library 3 times a week because I couldn't afford the software until last year. My brother Cian is finishing his last year of university, and I'm the reason he could. I grew up somewhere people told you to be realistic, and realistic meant small." She paused. "I am not small." "No," Fletcher said. "You are the least small person I have ever met." She looked at him for a long moment. "I think I'm in love with you. I thought you should know, even if the timing is inconvenient." He stood up from behind the desk, finally, after all of it, from behind the desk, and crossed the room and stood in front of her. His expression was something she hadn't seen from him before. Open, unguarded, like a window that had been painted shut for years and someone had finally run a knife along the seam. "I have been in love with you," he said, "since you told me to my face that I wasn't nearly as smart as I think I am," which I needed to hear, and no one else had ever bothered to say. She laughed, unexpected enough to surprise both of them. He took her hand carefully, like someone who understood that careful was the point. They didn't rush anything after that. That was perhaps what made it different from the relationships both of them had had before. They moved slowly and deliberately, the way people move when they've learned that rushing is how you miss the things that matter. The campaign launched to strong reviews. Wren's studio grew steadily. Fletcher, quietly and without making an announcement of it, restructured 2 of the company's community partnership agreements in ways she had mentioned over coffee months earlier, as if it were obvious. She noticed. She didn't mention it. She just watched to see if it would hold. It held. On a Sunday evening in September, on the rooftop of the Yonge Street Tower, where they had first spoken in a fluorescent hallway with a mop between them, Fletcher asked her to stay. Not just that night. Not just for the next project. To build something with him that was larger than either of them had thought to imagine when all of this began. She said yes. Not because she needed him. She had made very sure that she didn't need anyone in the way she once had. But because she chose him, deliberately. With her eyes open and her hands steady and everything she had built standing behind her, solid and entirely her own. That, she had come to understand, was the only way to begin something that lasts.